Greetings and welcome to this HPE First Technology Digital Podcast. My name is Aki Anastasiou, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you as we discuss this change that's happening around us and what does it mean for you and your business? What does it mean from the unpredictability of what's happening around us? And from a technology point of view, are you doing the right things? Are you using the right solutions to adapt your business to the changes? And I don't have to remind you, if I take you back to the beginning of March where the unthinkable happened and the impossible for many businesses soon became possible because of the value that technology unlocked. So it's great to welcome our special guests as we talk about remote working locations. We talk about how to unlock the value from a technological point of view, managing cash flow, which has been such an important aspect of the things that we are doing today, and preserving that business continuity. So it's a great pleasure to welcome Mr. Anton, Pauw, the Finance Area Manager for HPE Financial Services in South Africa. A great pleasure to welcome you to this HPE First Technology Digital Podcast. Businesses have had to adapt so quickly to survive. Can you share with us from HPE's point of view how this pandemic has affected businesses? What kind of things have you been seeing, Anton?
Thanks, Aki. Yeah, I think going back to your question, as the remote working and all of the adoption of different methods to do stuff and people transitioning their entire lives and livelihoods to different platforms, I think the biggest impact it's had on all of us is the emotional uncertainty, right? Not being able to plan and anticipate anything because initially we didn't know, is it going to be a month? Is it going to be 3 months? Is it going to be 6 months? And here we are 6 months plus down the line, and this new normal, that dreaded term that we all hear every day, it's a reality, and it's probably going to carry on for another number of months. We all hear and see and read the news that mentions vaccines that had to be found. And I think then day to day, we see businesses following the employees because the employees are the critical mass of any organization and the productivity they deliver. I mean, nowadays, it's not the parents watching the kids and being upset about their amount of screen time. It's the kids being upset about the parents' amount of screen time. And we run between Teams and Zoom calls day in and day out without breaks in between. It is a bit abnormal, but it is the new normal, as they say. And the pandemic has had this similar severe impact across all areas of business. I think we all know and hear about people that tell you how their businesses have adjusted and adapted in this time. And some of the stories are incredible. I mean, businesses that were on the brink of shutting down are now, and that's the good story we have to tell, are now going from strength to strength because they saw opportunity. And what we see as technology organizations is that's powering all of this change in a big way. I mean, even the way that tracking and tracing is done and location-based profiling is done in terms of numbers, it's all driven by technology, powered by tech.
I mean, it's incredible what you're describing there, Anton, but I imagine that safety and security of staff has had to be paramount. You know, I look at my organization, we couldn't go into the businesses. We all had to wear masks or get permission to go in if it was absolutely necessary. But safety and security must have been key as well.
Absolutely, Aki. So we all know of many companies that to this day, they haven't opened their doors again. They feel safer and they have the ability to get employees to work remotely from home mostly. And of course, the risks that come with that is primarily security. So beyond equipping and setting out the workforce to work remotely from home, you've got to also consider the security interfaces, new appliances. I mean, there's an amazing amount of tech out there that can allow and empower employees to work from home. But at the same time, this all costs money. And organizations had to do all of this transformation while being cash strapped like never before. So while we hear all the good stories about a company like Zoom and Microsoft Teams and their share prices and market caps going skyrocketing, the reality is that large financial services organizations, think about the insurers and the medical health insurers, they literally transitioned the entire call center workforces into home platforms, work from home. I mean, it's quite interesting. The other day I had a conversation with a Discovery health consultant about a claim that I had to resolve, and I could hear she was at home and there's a baby crying. it brought about a big change in how we perceive each other as well. That's the human aspect of it all. But the nice thing about it is that if imagine this pandemic happening a couple of years ago when we were all using dial-up connections or ADSL, it would have been vastly different. So the beauty of the technology is that it allows us to continue a more natural normal, but unfortunately, as I mentioned before, it comes at massive cost. So organizations had to adjust, they had to pivot, make changes, and as they began to realize that this was likely the new normal, the biggest adjustment was establishing a remote workforce that was actually fully productive with the view of continuing maybe on a 2-day basis. Security became more critical than ever, and the tail end being productivity. It had to be emphasized in every transformation project that businesses embarked on. The reality, unfortunately, is that companies still have to pay rent, right? The landlords didn't suddenly disappear. You might have had a few months of deferral or lowered rent payments, but in many instances, larger organizations specifically, they're not abandoning ship entirely. They're keeping their presence. They keep the lights on. They had to power the service centers. They had to make sure that everything's fully functioning at the office while they had all of this extra spend around workforce productivity. And of course, driving all of these technology platforms in a big way is the adoption and the movement to cloud. It just had to happen much faster than anticipated. And as we all know, there are critical workloads that simply don't belong in the cloud, whether it be for security or data sovereignty purposes. Not everything's a good fit for cloud. So it just summarizes that the CIO and the CFO and IT and business planning had their hands fuller than ever, because at the one end you had the safety and security matter of the workforce, and at the same time their productivity being all remote. So the workload and the strain placed on technology suddenly became the front line for every business.
No, I mean, it's fascinating listening to you, Anton. And you actually gave me the shivers when you said, imagine this happened a few years ago. I mean, even as much as like 4 years ago, if this had happened, I don't think most businesses would have been ready to adapt as fast as they've been able to in 2020. And technology has been kind of the savior, and the cloud has been the thing that's been the glue that's kept us all together. But at the end of the day, you talk about the CIOs and CTOs and all these C people that have to make sure that the businesses happen. How do organizations build that flexibility and scalability? I mean, you talked about it and people adapted, yes, at the beginning, but people are still thinking we still got to do a little bit more how they consume technology, for example, because we know that this COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted everything around us. Competitors are doing things differently. IT budgets have been shifted upside down. Whatever you were planning to do 18 months from now, you've got to fast track it and you've got to do it today. And we've got to do business differently because we also don't know how much longer this virus is going to be around us. But the way we've been working now, as you correctly say, most organizations will say that we are not going back to the way things were before. It's probably going to be a hybrid model, whatever it is. But how do organizations build that flexibility and scalability on how they consume technology? Because that's the big question here, Anton.
Absolutely. I think it's not only about having to sacrifice certain things and replace them with others. I think whether it's tech or whether it's anything else in the organization, I mean, we've seen teams getting together to culturally still boost themselves, to remain together as a team. And I mean, that's the apt word that Microsoft has for their platform, Microsoft Teams. It's not just like a WhatsApp chat or anything like that. You can share files, systems. They had birthday discussions together with co-team members that were having a birthday, for instance. It was about keeping it all together and keeping that natural flow of the business going. And at the same time, if you think about an organization planning a technology transition or how they'll evolve a technology platform from 1 year to the next, and maybe over the next 5 to 10 years, if you think about depreciation cycles of IT infrastructure, it should have never been about sacrificing any efficiencies. And I think any CIO worth his salt would have considered that first and foremost. I cannot make a quick decision in order to get everyone at home, get everyone productive, and sacrifice the technology transformation journey that I'm on. These are big ships, and they turn slowly in most organizations. Even in the mid-market and the small business space, it's not something that you can. It's not a decision about what happens in your data center, what happens in your interconnect, etc. It's not a decision you can take and reverse 12 months from now, right? And that's why cloud is such a popular thing. It's about being able to provision the right amount. But what companies done in the past is they get allocated a budget, and then the tech division goes and spends on a data center or storage or compute or a networking solution, for instance, plus all the software layers and support that go with that. And they would invest. And what do? Is you know more or less the curve of what the growth and the compute and storage growth would look like over the next 5 or so years, but you never know for certain. And especially you don't know when it will spike, when it will peak, and by how much it would. So you typically over provision. So I might not need that 100 teraflops or terabytes or whatever it is right now, but I'll probably need it in year 3. So I'll have to buy it now because I don't know what the rand dollar is going to do 2 years from now. I don't know what the pricing structures or the end of life certainty or viability will be in future. So let me spend all of it today in order to make sure it's there in future. And this has been, it's not uncommon for 60-70% of South African organizations to procure tech in this way. And I think in a big way also why traditional IT procurement has gotten a very bad name if you compare it to cloud, because hey, in the cloud I can consume what I need when I need it, right? But it's still preferable to have on-premise and hybrid solutions for many organizations. I mean, some of the largest organizations out there cannot port most of their workloads due to certain constraints or requirements. But they certainly would love to consume those platforms in a more easy to understand, budgetable fashion. So this new style of IT is prompting the CIO to look at the spend more than the actual tech, the speeds and the feeds. And primarily that is about over-provision. Don't over-provision. Don't install and pay for something that you're not going to need, but keep the certainty and performance what you used to have in an on-premise or a hybrid hosted data center structure, keep that intact. So the budget needs to be allocated elsewhere now, right? We mentioned keeping the lights on, paying staff, paying rent, etc. Companies need to scale up, but importantly, reclaim that overspend. And this became more important than ever to customers because, or to companies, they could suddenly claim back on overspend, and that had to pay salaries. That was the difference between companies having to get rid of certain parts of the workforce or reduce salaries, just being able to pivot the procurement structure around big tech. And COVID's turned this upside down rapidly. Cash flow, we've all heard the term cash is king, but I think it suddenly became truer than ever during COVID. Organizations are saying they need to consume resources as and when they are required, whether it's the internet connections they use, whether it's the insurance products they use, whether it's the electricity, the on-site services, whether it's data storage in the data center, whether it's out in the cloud. IT and finance were suddenly forced to talk to each other more than ever and to plan together. But a financial decision maker isn't necessarily always a technical expert, right? So the one has certain needs and requirements. Tech side of the business, they want to make sure that everyone's equipped with the right tech at the right time, that the provisioning of capacity is always there when it's needed. And finance is saying, hang on, this is costing a lot of money. I know you'll need more, but can't we just rather get it when we need it and start paying for it when it's needed? And to make that palatable, organizations, the OEMs, the vendors such as HPE and our partners such as First Tech had to come up with models to make this simplified model. Is if I need additional storage or additional compute, how do I factor that to become a simple table matrix to say, all right, if I boost from 20 to 30 of terabytes or nodes in my data center, how much will it cost me and how much will I be paying on a monthly basis if I do that only 12 or 18 months from now? And previously, companies couldn't do this. They had to go out and pray that there wouldn't be a very adverse rand dollar effect, for instance, if they're under provisioned upfront. And then 18 months down the line, they would have to go through a full new procurement cycle in order to add additional storage or nodes performance-wise to the data center. It wasn't a good fit, although it certainly aligned better with the financial decision makers. It was unplannable and unbudgetable because you never know what that tech is going to cost a year, 2, 3 years from now. So now with all of these new consumption models being introduced, there's a more sensible link between the CIO and the IT decision makers, and they can take these decisions jointly.
Very interesting. I mean, there's also all sorts of nuances and things that are happening in the background, and you've captured so much of the way COVID-19 has changed how businesses operate and how they're consuming technology. Now, you talk about consumption and how the consumption-based IT model can help enterprises drive that digital transformation initiatives. I mean, that's really makes so much sense. You pay for what you use, basically, right, Anton?
Absolutely. So we all know that what's important today, especially in the tech space, is not necessarily the norm for the next 5 to 10 years. And again, COVID's just accelerated or highlighted that more than ever, that the reality that we need to deal with the uncertainty of the next 6 to 12 to 18 months. Perhaps South Africa, depending on whether it's that V or U or W or whatever shaped recovery that people are speaking about, one needs to be prepared for uncertainty more than anything else. So the immediate effect is dealing with.
But Anton, you're a finance guy, right? You look at this. You mentioned what 5 to 6, 12 months, right? I mean, a lot of people are saying, well, we haven't really felt the effects of COVID-19. I mean, when can we expect some kind of recovery? And when is it really going to hit us hard? Because right now it's still happening, business things, but people are saying 2021 is the year that it's going to get really rough. From a finance point of view, is that what you're seeing as well?
Absolutely. And we're seeing it in the market space right now on the tech front and the procurement cycles as well. There's a lot of businesses that came out of lockdown with new plans, new curves, with new interesting business models. They've been able to save costs very rapidly early on. But the real financial effect, and I think we're hearing more and more economists and analysts talking about this, is that, look, the unemployment rate in South Africa, we can't get away from that. How it's going to affect South Africa's purchasing parity in the global backdrop. We'll only be feeling a lot of this sometime next year, and we don't know. I mean, if it's March or February or later on. And that, unfortunately, is a reality. So even the guys out there, organizations with big pockets, deep pockets, are holding back. They're saying, hang on, I need to be very careful about how and when I spend. But every day or month or year that you don't evolve and you don't spend on this expensive tech platform that keeps everyone going from home, remotely if needed, they're asking the question, when do I transition? So when is the right time? If I wait too long, it costs me more. If I go too quick, it's also maybe costing too much too soon. And again, this is highlighting the importance of consuming as opposed to purchasing upfront. Like we always say, it's accessing as opposed to owning. And this is where the shift comes in from traditional procurement to something more flexible. And yes, we all know that more traditional models are geared around pure financing or leasing in this space. But what the consumption models are doing, and in particular HPE GreenLake, is it gives the organization access to a platform with the minimum capacity needed now. And it's tiered, easy to understand, and it adds additional capacity in an incremental basis from a payment and tech point of view at a later stage. So we're seeing that this is driving organizations going forward. So that paying on a month-to-month basis while keeping intact with all of the necessary platforms and technologies, that deals in a big way with this uncertainty around when is the true recovery coming, or is it going to get worse before it gets better?
It's interesting you say that, and I mean, so you actually you're technically preserving a lot of cash by doing it this way, and you're able to have a more predictable cash flow going forward, and this is going to become critical in the next in the next few months. But at the end of the day, Anton, when you look at the technology investment, this is where it's going, right? It's all about access and not ownership. How can organizations be sure that they are choosing a consumption-based model that is right for them as opposed to owning it? Because, I mean, there's the other side of the coin that, am I doing the right thing?
Certainly. Now, there's a lot of noise out there. Okay? We're hearing, only in the last couple of years, the big cloud players, AWS and Microsoft and the likes, have all entered South Africa. And suddenly there's a vast amount of options out there. And organizations are still struggling to deal with something as elementary but as beautiful as the Microsoft 365 platform, for instance, which is kind of the entry level, in my mind, cloud platform for any business out there. It makes sense, all it's cloud hosted. It deals with all of your office and team collaboration, et cetera, and then more and more workloads followed. But in a big way, like I said, organizations still need to have that on-premise structure for many of their workloads. So this consume as and when I need it, I think a lot of it is forged on the simple stuff that we as consumers have been doing, like consuming music. Think about the iTunes platform, YouTube Premium, Play Music, Sonify, all of those. We used to purchase CDs, right, or tapes or LPs, depending on how old you are.
Now you're giving your age away, Anton.
At least I started with CDs, right?
At least you didn't say LPs or records, you know. So you still fit into that youngish mode, right?
I still know what to do if someone gives me a pencil and an old tape. Right?
But still, I mean, it's such a great example you use about music. I was thinking about it the other day, how I'm consuming music. You know, Spotify, you mentioned Apple Music. That makes so much sense, right?
No, certainly. It's I think it made us easy, or it made us more comfortable with the new world of consumption, right? If you're comfortable to consume your Gmail and your Google or your Microsoft services as an individual, and you've got all your personal information, I mean, that's a topic for a whole different discussion. But I mean, most of us have personal information floating around in the cloud out there. To us, that's more personal than any of the business information we might be dealing with, right? So I think organizations feel more comfortable knowing that it isn't as insecure as some might think. There's certainly a lot of sense in offloading workloads into the cloud. And that's driven this consumption-based narrative in a big way. Yet, like I said, many organizations with sensitive data said, hang on, I want to consume it that same way. I want to consume it like in the cloud, but I want it in my data center or in my partner or my service provider's data center. But I certainly want to pay for it month to month. And if I need more, I want to pay more. And of course, that's how these solutions developed and evolved.
Fascinating. You mentioned earlier about HPE GreenLake. HPE Nimble Storage. I mean, these are things that, you know, these are technologies that enable businesses to reduce risk and financial exposure, as you've so eloquently put out, in terms of how you pay for these kind of things. In these uncertain times, do these technologies meet the unexpected demand? How can you use HPE GreenLake and HPE Nimble Storage to really reduce your risk and meet the unexpected demand that you will experience in your business?
Yeah, I think in the past, these flexible models aren't entirely new, right? The cornerstone of it all was the more traditional, you purchase or procure a large infrastructure solution as an organization, or even workplace assets, notebooks, desktops, whatever it is you need, printers, and you would then potentially go to a financial provider or financing entity, or maybe your own bankers, and you would finance it to spread the payments towards that technology over its useful life. What GreenLake is doing, and that's just the name that HPE has coined for its true full-blown as-a-service consumption model, it brings all of the different technologies together, and it simplifies the contractual format of it all, right? In the past, you would have an SLA running in parallel to a finance agreement. So you would have the best of both worlds, but they wouldn't join in any way. Now, an organization can sign one agreement, and it's a consumption agreement. So it doesn't talk so much about hell and high water conditions about paying for the tech. It brings together the services aspect. And the important thing for customers there is now I have one point of reference, I have one point of accountability, and I've got a much simpler to understand contractual format with the same technology platform that I use to procure cash outright with budget set aside for this particular project. So what HPE has done with GreenLake is bring it all together. But more importantly, and or as important, I'd say, is the combination of that to bring together the hybrid, hyper-converged edge stuff in a simple consumption basis. Many organizations don't run wall-to-wall single vendor shops, right? As much as a vendor, we would prefer each customer out there to run their entire environment on HPE and HPE Kit, using the Aruba platforms as interconnect and access points, etc. The reality is that many organizations are multi-vendor, right? If you look at the technology that they're utilizing, you would most likely find 5 to 10 to 20 different vendors in any large organization out there. And even the smaller ones are most often utilizing at least 5 to 10 different vendors to make it all work. So it's with the acknowledgement of all of that HPE said, right, let's accommodate third-party equipment into the GreenLake landscape as well. So what GreenLake really does is it provides a consumption-based platform end-to-end for all of the tech that needs to go into the data center or at the edge.
Anton, you talk about all these, GreenLake and, adapting and CIOs using as a consumption service. But at the end of the day, all of this costs money. Okay, and you being the guy at HPE who handles all the finances and that sort of thing, does HPE make it, do you have competitive financing structures to, help me with my cash flow, reduce my cash outlays during this uncertainty? So is HPE helping me as the customer?
Absolutely, Aki. The reality is that HPE Financial Services has been operating alongside HPE and HPE for the past almost 2 decades. And before the evolution of everything as a service and consumption-based computing, it used to be, like I mentioned earlier on, more traditional financing and leasing structures. And those haven't gone away. They are still very much alive, used by many organizations, small or large, out there. And it's all about spreading the useful life or the payments towards the technology over the useful life of the kit, right? Not paying for it all up front. We always use the analogy, if only organizations could pay their employees 3 years up front, they would save a lot in terms of bonuses or increases. But the reality is they don't. They pay them month to month. And technology needs to be thought about in a similar way. Just pay for it as and when it delivers productivity. And there's a lot of upfront expenses on any technology platform, including software support, etc. And what HPFS does, without going into too much detail, is we would either provide an option for customers to leverage a more traditional financing vehicle, or even a true lease, which is more towards consumer to use it, pay for only the useful life, and then return it to the HPE refurb partners where it's repurposed and given a new life. All of that is now strapped together under GreenLake, where the HPFS component becomes merely a building block. So what GreenLake does is it focuses more on the experience and the capacity needed for the customer to unlock productivity, as opposed to the speeds and feeds, how many drivers and processes, etc., go into the solution. So it takes what leasing and financing has done from a consumption point of view. It adds all of the services, SLAs, monitoring, making sure the equipment's up and running, good condition, the solution is doing what it's supposed to do, and bringing it all together under one simple agreement. But there's not one fit for all. Out there, there's certainly still a space for both more traditional financing models, with the flexibility that comes with that. And of course, the more, as we call it, the Bentley of these solutions would be the GreenLake option, which allows a true consumption-based structure.
Yeah, but what I'm hearing from you there, Anton, is that you guys can tailor any kind of solution to suit a business based on its growth, etc., which is great that HPE is providing this flexibility. Anton Pauw, Finance Area Manager at HPE Financial Services. Thank you so much for joining us in this HPE First Technology Digital podcast. Your insights and thoughts have been absolutely fascinating to listen to. I've certainly learned so much, and what we've all seen happening in the last few months is the unpredictability. But we do know is that technology is an enabler. It adds value and unlocks a tremendous amount of value in continuing that business continuity that you have both been speaking about. And it's a critical aspect of growing the business, preserving that business continuity, and also managing the growth of your businesses.